Please give a warm welcome back to the stage, Ella Sagar, who'll be hosting Can Everything Be a Media Network? And I will also welcome Ella's panel up to the stage, and she will be able to make the introductions. Please give them a warm welcome.
So I'm Ella Sagar, I'm the reporter at The Media Leader. I'm going to be chairing this session on Can Everything Be a Media Network? I will be inviting questions from the floor later, so have a think as we're speaking, and about 5-10 minutes before the end, I'll have someone with a mic, probably Steve, running around. So just let us know when you're asking your question, who you are and what company you're from. That would be great. So let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce our panel. So we've got Sebastien Bourne, who's head of media for North West and Central Europe at HP. And we have Nicole Kivel, who's managing director for Northern Europe at Enterprise at Criteo. And Nathalie Lethbridge, who's global chief growth officer and managing director for EMEA and North America at Vudoo. Thanks for joining me, everybody. So the kind of title of this session is about Can Everything Be a Media Network? I wanted to start off with some definitions of what a media network is. Sebastien, if you wouldn't mind starting, and then we can also bring in commerce media. I know, Nathalie, we've spoken about content commerce as well, but for Sebastien, what for you is a media network?
I mean, that's a very, very, very broad question. So I think, I'll dive straight into kind of more the retail media element, since that's more my background. So I think retail media is obviously quite, we spoke with kind of David and Steve earlier around what kind of networks were, in terms of, okay, you've got the roasters on one side, then you've got all the tech partners in the middle kind of helping clients like myself try and buy on-site and off-site. Mm-hmm. So I'll keep it quite broad for now.
Okay. Nicole, what for you is a media network? What are the components?
I mean, the component is, first, to be defined as a network, there has to be multiple puzzle pieces to it. Mm-hmm. It has to be interconnecting elements. And so it could be something where you're connecting those elements across broad network capabilities. So it could be different retailers, it could be different publisher capabilities, but it could also be solutions. So people would look at something like a Roundel in the US, which is Target's retail media proposition, which is built across various different solutions and capabilities, which in itself is a network. Mm-hmm. So, the summary of that is, can I execute various media types with various different potential outcomes to it?
Mm-hmm. Nicole, what do you think of when I say media network?
Well, I think you've just summarised it beautifully, both of you. And the question is whether that network operates within a confined environment, in retail, for instance, where the retailer is providing those touch points and those connections, or whether it happens more generally, and that you can actually transact and track and implement outside of that.
Yeah. Today we've spoken also about commerce media, and I think some people use the terms interchangeably. I wonder, for you guys, what is the distinction between them, and why does it matter for media planners, buyers, strategists? Sebastien, I know that we talked about this before.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess for us, in obviously my world of kind of technology, commerce media is more looking at, I'm going to bring the funnel back. I apologize.
Even though it doesn't exist.
Even if it doesn't exist, so we're going to talk in theoretical terms here. So for us, more it's like, okay, on-site versus on-site, as I kind of previously mentioned. So this, for us, is going to be more of the off-site. So, going across the web.
Correct.
To try and obviously go after the audiences that we want, bring them back to our retail partners, and hopefully make them convert.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nicole?
So I would probably unpack that as the difference between commerce media and the difference between retail media. Mm-hmm. And it's such a slight nuance there. And so commerce media is the ability to activate media tying into shopper behavior, what people are buying, and leveraging that data for various different outcomes. It could be, we want to leverage a grocery shopper's audience and detect and understand who that mom shopper is to bring video content around baby formula or something along those lines. That's commerce, because we're leveraging those audiences and their buying behavior to deliver a myriad of ad outcomes. Retail media is very different, in which retail media is leveraging the on-site and audience access assets of a retailer to then attribute sales from that retailer. So an advertiser wanting to execute within a retail environment, one of the key components is they want to know, okay, did they buy that product from that retailer? Because that's a black box for me.
That's the
HP,
point.
you know your DTC sales, but
That's
you
it.
don't necessarily know what's happening across your retailers. That is a core revenue stream for you. So you need retail media to reach those consumers and make sure they're buying your product. And that's the key piece, is that closed loop sales attribution.
So you can kind of track the whole
Exactly.
thing and have visibility on that, Nathalie.
And I think the point that I would make there, that closed loop attribution, eventually retail media networks will become silos in and of themselves. And so where commerce content media operates is to sit really potentially above that for brands. And so, as you've just said, it's really about the ability to attribute from the point of impression all the way to the point of transaction. That's the focus of traditional content commerce and content media spend. And retail media, however, takes you into what is potentially a siloed but complete environment, which is owned by the retailer. So that would also be, for me, a point of differentiation.
And I think at the moment there's more than 70 retail media networks, or call themselves retail media networks. And there's obviously going to be lots more entering this space, as we heard in Steve's presentation. Fragmentation, consolidation, sophistication as well, and a huge growth in spend. What does a company need to think about when launching a retail media network? I know, Nicole, you kind of work on this side of things. So what are the kind of the sort of expectations versus the reality of launching a retail media network?
Absolutely. There's a lot of considerations. And right now, because of the headlines, because of the growth of retail media, every retailer's out there wanting to stand up a media business. But there has to be some real questions they need to ask themselves is do they have the foundational elements to be successful? And the chief prerequisite to that is, do I have a wide distribution of third-party brands that would equate to meaningful advertising? Do I have the scale and volume and sales that would then facilitate that even further? Is that scale there that would actually drive appetite, that brands are going to want to invest in me as a retail media destination? Then from there, we have to look even further to it to say, great, even if you meet all of that criteria, well, okay, what's our tech resource like? Do we have the technical infrastructure internally? So even though you rely on ad tech partners, there's still elements that you have to do from an integration standpoint. Then there's also the corporate buying capabilities. Is customer experiencing, understanding the value and ads appearing on the site? Then there's the commercial element. Do we have the sales and knowledge to be able to speak to brands and media agencies? And there's a lot of entities out there that have all of that. I mean, Walmart, for example. Amazon's the obvious choice, but there's other retailers out there that have that scale, that capability, that knowledge, and that they've brought in-house. And then others, it's a different answer. It might be more of a hybrid approach to say, we don't have that commercial capability, so we're going to partner and leverage our tech providers like a Criteo to help support us in that. And it's really understanding your DNA to make sure that you're not going to make the wrong steps. Because as profitable as retail media can be for retailers, it can also be a cost-draining journey if you're not understanding those components and really understanding your value in that proposition. Last year, I think one of the most interesting headlines was how Gap was shutting down their retail media proposition. Rightly so, because they didn't meet any of that criteria to have a retail media network. And then from a commerce media perspective, their audience just wasn't compelling enough for advertisers to be putting a premium value to execute against that. So these are the things to really make sure that, is retail media right for you, or would it be a distraction? And that's particularly the questions that a lot of smaller retailers need to be asking themselves.
Because it is quite an attractive proposition when you look at the margins compared to, say, if you're a grocery retailer, and the margins you would normally experience on those kinds of products as opposed to those kind of ads. But then it will take a while to get off the ground, and that's kind of the idea that I'm getting at. And it might not just be right for a specific brand of a specific size without those kind of capabilities. Am I understanding right?
Yeah. So yeah, if you can have a retail media group, but if you don't have the scale, the revenue is going to be quite small, even though the margin is there. And for an advertiser, they're going to invest in things that have scale. Something that's not generating high volume in media spend. It's just a distraction for them. And on-site media is going to have the highest margin. And then when you start thinking about off-site, then you're going to have the costs that come with executing media on the open web, so the margins get smaller. But it's so appealing because you're saying, oh, I can have all of this revenue because people just want to advertise on my site. That's fantastic. But it's understand, will they? Do they want to? Do you have the appeal to do that?
I think in a podcast recently, I was speaking to Kivel from Rundle & Thompson and Simon Akers from Archman, and they were saying that travel is quite a ripe sector for this kind of retail media network. And I've also spoken to Revolut, who've launched an advertising offering, so the kind of banking space and financial space, because they have that first-party data and they have that kind of insight. Natalie, so you were saying that travel is something that...
It's not just about, the insight and the scale. It's also, there are now rich media tools which allow you to get deeper engagement with the content and the content experience and customize it and then lead a path to purchase. And so for travel, that's ideal for that sort of product. It keeps someone in your content, and it drives them to purchase, and then you can see what part of it, in terms of the view and the data, you can see what part of it works and what doesn't. We did something called Choose Your Own Adventure, which was very effective in delivering a higher transaction rate in terms of capability there. Yeah. So, and also in the talking about premium, you were talking about the need to develop added value in premium brands. So I think this is also an interesting area for premium brands to be able to do is to be able to leverage all of that and create and preserve their premium value.
When you say premium brands, what do you mean by that?
I think you're better placed to answer that question.
It's going to mean different things for different retailers. So you'd usually say those that have very strong marketing backing. So if you're a grocer, that's going to mean that the Unilevers and the P&Gs of the world, we would actually see you as a meaningful channel for investment. But if you are a fashion retailer, that can mean an Adidas or a Nike or another brand. It's going to depend on. Or do you have the appeal to reach brands and being able to tap into budget that might ordinarily be reserved for TV, video content, etc.?
Yeah, and Sebastien, I know we talked about the finance kind of brands getting in on retail media networks and the kind of potential kind of thorny issues they might encounter there. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to add something to what you guys have just said around, okay, if you're about to launch a whole new network, are you able to talk to the different parties involved, so the agencies of the world? Are you set up to talk to them, speak their language? Are you also able to talk to people like myself, client side, not only from a marketing perspective, but also the sales teams that actually sell product to you? So for example, when I have to go and speak to Amazon, I have to speak to my teams within the marketing departments, but also the sales teams who are selling product to them. So it's, at the moment, everyone's talking different languages. So how can we all come around to the same table, speak the same language?
And Sebastien, you've made a really good point there, because all of this is only capable of being delivered if the salespeople and the brands are really aware of the value of all of this and understand and have a common terminology. I mean, I guess that's where someone like Criteo comes into play, that you're working across all of that and trying to develop a whole total solution.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the challenges we see with going back to my point earlier of the commercial setup for retailers, in that they're retailers and they shouldn't disrupt. That is their core business. But they have a media proposition. But some of the challenges, if you don't onboard that right knowledge, that right experience, is they only know how to talk to brands in the context of being a retailer. Not a media budget, and which goes back to the earlier point.
Talking to brands as suppliers rather than as clients.
Exactly, rather than around standardization, metrics, reporting, etc. And that is a big key point that is incredibly important if you're going to scale, if you're going to really have meaningful conversations, if you're going to tap into agency budgets that would be reserved for other media channels. And that's something that often we see with some retailers.
And I think, so when it comes to budgets and things that where does the budget for retail media actually come from? Does it come from other kind of digital media? Does it come from shopper media? Does it come from trade? This is a question that kind of comes up when I speak to agencies and buyers, and
But to that point, there's a lot of talk about budgets, and in the US, for instance, in retail media alone, there is an assumption that at the moment it's 35% of total ad spend is retail media, assumed to go to 50% in the next 3 or 4 years. But that budget isn't cannibalizing the existing budget, because there was a recent survey done of on that, where it was said that brands are creating new budgets for this as well, and because it's a new way of thinking about reaching an audience and delivering messages. So it's not one pie that's being divided up. And
so it's kind of, as David was saying in an earlier session, it's not like taking from Peter to pay Paul. They are
it's
kind of creating a new...
and it's a new experience, and it's a new way of delivering, and it's a new language that's being... And it's really almost a new business model in that sense.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting space, and I think there are lots of tactics and strategies that can be used for brands. We've talked about the full funnel. Does it exist? Does it not? I mean, that was previously discussed in a session. Sebastien, so what would you say for brands to make the most of a retail media network? What kind of tactics or strategies would you be looking at?
I mean, I was going to say, I do like 3, but I'm going to go with 4 different types. So using all the inventory and available, so all the ad formats available, because a lot of people just focus on lower funnel ones or upper funnel ones.
Like the display and sponsored search.
Search.
It's kind of lower funnel. And
exactly.
then the upper funnel would be like the videos.
Video that Amazon has just launched, or the lifestyle ones that they've launched as well. So use all the arsenal that you have available to you. So I'd say that's obviously a must do.
Okay.
2, don't think of retail media as just your lower funnel. Okay, we need to be there just to protect our space, or go after competitors. Actually use, again, back to my origin point, use all the inventory available, because you can talk to the audiences at all the points, even content media, like you were saying earlier. So that's the second one. Third one, I think, back to kind of what Nathalie was saying about on-site and off-site. How do these people work together? How can you make it work together within your overall strategy? And the last one, and this is going to sound quite basic in this day and age, but think about your always-on strategy. Don't just come online, especially like now in Q4, about your Black Friday, Cyber Monday, or yesterday and today, Prime Day, full Prime Days as they call it now. So think about how does this support search, social, programmatic, out-of-home TV, all your other channels, and bring it together.
Yeah, it's a kind of holistic picture.
Exactly.
So that goes across like the whole, touching all of the different kind of metrics that you might be using for like awareness all the way through to sales.
Exactly.
Nathalie?
But here's the thing, though. If you look at it in its true entirety, and your ability to actually track your customer from your initial impression all the way to the transaction, which retail media networks, by definition, should be able to provide you with. And now technologies such as Vudoo enable you to do outside of that as well. The funnel collapses, and you can actually take all those metrics and just have one view of your customer. And that in itself is part of the transformational nature of it. So you're not separating your brand awareness from your transactional value. You're actually bringing it together. And that in itself is a very exciting thing for a brand.
Yeah, big time.
So it's not just doing the awareness, or...
No, it's not the old-fashioned
it's not an either or, it's not an upper funnel or lower funnel.
It's actually building a new way of thinking of the totality of your ROI on your investment and looking at brand awareness at the same time.
So we kind of have to retrain how we think about these things in buckets, in terms of
shift
it's not this budget or that budget, it's
process.
not this thing or that thing.
Yeah.
Nicole, do you have anything like to add?
I agree on that, but I think that the budgets would come into play in terms of, who am I as the brand? What am I trying to achieve? Am I trying to reach new shoppers? So I've never talked to this person before. They've never bought from me. And so my expectations on return on ad spend, ROI, are going to be very different, but it's incredibly meaningful. So that would align itself to more traditional upper funnel. So as much as the purchase funnel has collapsed, the net expectations on the KPIs are still exist. If we're trying to reach new shoppers, it's trying different audiences, it's trying to meet them, and obviously performance is now going to be tied into it, but your expectations is going to be very different than something that really is bottom funnel, which is, something like a sponsored products or something along those lines.
And you're right, the current KPIs are very much based on that now.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how they evolve
How
and
it
whether there is a
changes.
new capability of actually framing those in a different way in the future. But a new customer is a new customer is a new customer. So you still have to be able to
It really
reach
goes
that.
back to kind of knowing your audience at the end of the day. So is your audience, are you going to go back to what you're saying after net new? Are you just actually, in the loop, or effectively just getting the same people to repurchase over and
Chase
over
that
again?
same customer
Chase
over and
them,
over again.
Chase
Like
them
a
till
dog
they
chasing
convert
its
type of thing.
Eventually they're gonna buy.
But yeah, ultimately, know your customer, know what their behavior is, and then
And
be
understand-
present.
Understand, because now we have the tech tools to do that, understand how to sort of slightly adjust your spend and what you're doing. And I think that's another
Kind of an
element
optimize
that
it.
tech is bringing into play now with these networks. It's the ability to be much more flexible and agile about how you adapt to your customers and the information you're receiving, whether it's existing customers or whether it's converting new customers. And that, I think, is one of the exciting things as well about all of this.
I'm just going to check if anybody's got any questions from the audience. If you do, please put up your hand. Pedro? As always.
Pedro must
You could
have
just
a
say
question.
your name and your company, your questions.
Yeah. So Pedro.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guys. So Pedro from Havas. I actually have two questions for different people. One of them is obviously not everything can be a retail media network. So for Sebastien specifically, how do you choose, being a brand, where to be present? So what are the key parameters, let's say, that you look at? And then second question, more to Nicole. Obviously, we are talking about media networks, so becoming a media machine. But to what extent is the retail marketplace, so when is a retail marketplace, multi-brand website, etc., become a media network or should become a media network?
Sebastien, do you want to go first?
Okay, I'll kick it off. Cool. Thank you, Pedro. So how do we go about effectively selecting the retail partners that we work with? Now, there's two ways we look at it over at HP. Obviously, one, do we have commercial deals with them? So does this partner kind of buy from us already? If so, cool, let's have a conversation. Do you have a retail network that's operational? Yes, no, let's talk. The other one is, obviously, I look after kind of Europe. So there's not just one advertiser, unlike the US where you might have just one or two big players. In Europe, we have 30 plus people, retailers that we work with. So unfortunately, we can't go and talk to everyone because we don't have infinite budgets at the end of the day, like what we were talking about. So it's, okay, who are the primary, maybe one, two, or third players that we can go and have a conversation with? Can we activate on them? Yes, no. What kind of data can they pass back to us? Can we work on some kind of data deal, trade deal, commercial deal with the sales teams? And can we find any added value for everyone? So we can all walk away happy from the table.
Makes sense. And then I think in terms of, so your question, you mentioned marketplaces.
Yeah.
So a marketplace is different than a retailer. So Amazon's obviously a marketplace. Something like Bol in the Netherlands is a marketplace. So that's with those third-party distributors. So the retailers don't own the stock. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, but you also have retailers that have
Yeah.
third-party.
Oh yeah, they'll have, you can go on a retailer and it'll be, Amazon does too, fulfilled by Amazon, or it's fulfilled by like greatlaptops.com. So it's the same thing that I talked about before in terms of, what is the appeal to it? What is the scale, the technical infrastructure to it? And those are the key pieces to it to understand, because you're going to have, a small site, but then it's also what is their expectations. A lot of them are utilizing technology like a Criteo because they want to bring a layer of sophistication to their already in-house trade activity, reporting capabilities, more self-service models, and that's great. But if it's, I want to be able to access all of this budget I'm hearing about that comes from media agencies, it just goes back to that question. Do you have scale meaningful enough for someone at Havas that wants to spend time investing money in it, pulling out the reporting? And I think that's really what it boils down to. And then are you enabling the data access and those reporting elements to be shared to the media world, so that's going to meet the expectations for activity?
I'm just going to ask a question before I open up to questions again. So we talked a lot about, well, we've mentioned a few times like the expectations. How have you seen the expectations of when you're talking about retail media networks or content commerce in your case, Nathalie? How have you seen the expectations change? Or like the kind of conversation, what has been, say, from this time last year to now?
I think one of the positive things that I've seen is a shift away from ROAS being the overarching only metric to look at. ROAS is incredibly important. The return on ad spend is, was my media profitable at least in what I was able to achieve from a sales perspective in retail media. But if you only look at that, you can be missing a much broader story. If the return on ad spend is lower than you anticipated, there could be more there. It could have been all new shoppers that you've been trying to reach and get them to buy your product that haven't, and then you have to make, is this actually really if I'm an FMCG brand, is there that lifetime value dynamic that I need to be looking at?
Yeah.
Versus something and having a tremendous return on ad spend, and it turns out that's that same shopper that we always talk to and they always buy my product. So is that actually wasted media budget? So starting to add the other layers is becoming one of the expectations. So when we talk to brands, it's definitely not just about that versus previously that was the end all be all that was making decisions around, do I further invest or do I cut budget?
Could I just add on that? Is that because the layer of information that you're receiving is much more many more layers of information that you're receiving in those networks, that people are becoming more sophisticated in their thinking about the return on investment, that they can see different bits of the journey and the funnel or whatever we want to call it, because we're obviously inventing a new name today. That's not the funnel. But
I would say it's a mix of things. It definitely is the technical capability is there to tell that story as the sophistication is happening. And then that's more of the quantifiable. But from a qualified viewpoint, the sophistication has evolved now where if we think back to the early days of retail media, particularly if you were a FMCG brand that's never really been able to get insights into that when it comes to your media execution because you don't own that actual purchase behavior. But even someone for, like an HP that, yes, I know everything that happens on mybrand.com, but once they go to another retailer, that's the black box for me. So once you started seeing that sales, the excitement was there and the return on ad spend, it was so compelling. But now that it's at a level of maturity, you're able to take a step back and say, okay, what else do I need to understand here? When investment starts increasing and we're moved beyond just testing and we're now putting serious media money into it, serious questions start getting answered. And what is this achieving? And you're going to look at more metrics. So there's two sides to it. Yeah. I don't know if you have a different perspective as well, coming from the brand. And
coming from the brand.
How have the conversations about retail media kind of changed?
No, it's really interesting. I mean, they have, because about 3-4 years ago, when obviously everything kicked off, it was more around, cool, can we still budget from X channel, reinvest it, right? Now the conversations are more mature, back to your point, are more around, okay, which laptop should I be pushing because actually that has a better return back to the business than this one? Should we be selling Omen versus HP versus Invictus since we are multiple brands? Or can we tag on keyboards, laptop screens? Now the conversation has evolved away from ROAS and more into business metrics, which becomes way more interesting.
And it's really interesting because from the software enablement point of view, which is where we come from, we're enabling all of this, it's fascinating the velocity of interest in this and how it's really just gone through the roof in the last 12 months from all sectors. And I think part of it is triggered by the fact that there is an observation that consumer behavior has changed. And you're hearing, stories about TikTok making $1 billion this year in Southeast Asia from its commerce platform. So there's obviously, if I'm a brand, I'm going to be interested in making sure I don't miss out on a slice of that changed consumer behavior, which is about being able to purchase from your content. And
we might have time for one quick question if anyone has one. I think in the middle. Sorry, I saw him first, Steve. If you could just say your name and company.
Thanks. Colin from Clear Channel. I wanted to ask, so it seems like a massive opportunity for the kind of off-site, off-platform growth for retail media networks. At what point, or do you think we're going to see some of the retailers think about becoming more traditional media owners in their own right? So Amazon having a digital out-of-home network or Tesco having a streaming service just because of the ad revenue they can generate from that?
It's already happened. I mean, Amazon Anywhere is already launched, so it's happening. It's already now. It's literally happening now.
So I think somewhat related to when we hear Amazon is yes, it's still early days in terms of how they're thinking about pulling together their in-store assets and the online opportunities, but a lot of these retailers also sit on something very powerful that an Amazon doesn't have, which is that in-store data, the in-store purchase.
That's true.
And starting to marry that with the activity happening online around customer behavior is really powerful. And that's going to be a big differentiator as retailers start really talking about that in a big way, because that's far more powerful than when we compare it to just the pure play dynamic of an Amazon.
And you're hearing Walmart talk about that a lot now.
Yeah. So yes, so I think that's our time. Thank you for your comments, and I think we answered the question: can everything be a retail media network? No, but there's a list. You can.
A lot can.
There's a lot of you can,
but not everyone.
there are certain criteria.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.